Chapter 1. The darkness in the lower pits of Oakhaven was not merely the absence of light, it was a physical weight, greasy with the smell of tallow, old blood, and the sour ash that filtered down from the dying world above. Silas hung from the ceiling by rusted iron chains, his wrists raw and bleeding where the metal bit into his flesh with every shuddering breath. His left hand, crushed by Commander Jarek's blacksmith tongs, throbbed with a rhythmic, white-hot agony that seemed to sync with the distant, heavy thud of the city's failing water pumps. Across the damp stone corridor, the white-tiled interrogation room glowed with a sickening, artificial yellow light. Inquisitor Vane stood by the brazier, slowly turning a long, iron rod until its tip glowed the color of a dying star. "You see, Silas," Vane said, his voice smooth and conversational, entirely out of place in the Chamber of Horrors, "the mistake you made was believing that people want to be saved. They don't. They want to be managed. A starving man will obey any law if you promise him a crust of bread tomorrow. But a man who looks up at a blue sky, he starts to think. He starts to question why he lives in a hole while we live in the plaza. Your lost hope is an infection." Silas raised his head, his vision blurred by a curtain of matted, bloody hair. The blight is stopping, Vane. You can't hide the sun forever." Vane chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He stepped forward, lifting the glowing iron rod. "Watch me." The iron met Silas's ribs. The scream that tore from his throat didn't sound like a human voice, it was the sound of a tearing sail, a jagged rip in the silence of the deep. The heat cooked his flesh, but inside his mind, Silas didn't see the white-tiled room or Vane's elegant, lavender-scented coat. He saw the northern plateau. He saw the infinite, impossible blue of the open sky, and the golden warmth that had kissed his face before the world went dark again. He held onto that image like a drowning man holding a piece of timber. They could burn his skin, they could crush his bones, but they could not unwrite the truth of what he had seen. For 3 weeks, the cycle continued. The torturers changed, each bringing a different flavor of malice. There was Jarek's blunt, mechanical brutality, the salt scrape that left Silas's back a mosaic of raw nerves, the hours spent locked in a stone well filled with freezing, stagnant water where blind insects crawled across his eyelids. Then there was the psychological knife wielded by his former mentor, Sharon, who visited the cell not with irons, but with the leather journal he had stolen. "They're dismantling the coordinate logs tomorrow, Silas," Sharon whispered one night, leaning against the iron bars, his face shadowed by guilt. "The council is sending an engineering crew to the Iron Pass with black powder. They're going to blow the mountain collapse completely, burying the white obelisk under 10,000 tons of granite. The beacon will be crushed. The sky will go back to gray. Just sign the retraction. Tell the people it was an optical illusion caused by atmospheric gas, and Vane will let you live out your days in the archive libraries." Silas looked at the man who had taught him how to read the ancient scripts, the man who had given him his first map. The betrayal was a deeper, colder wound than any iron rod. "You used to tell me that knowledge was the only thing worth dying for, Sharon," Silas whispered, his voice cracked like dry clay. "I lied," Sharon said bitterly, turning away. "Survival is the only thing worth having." "Then you've already died," Silas said to the retreating shadow. "You just haven't stopped walking yet." Chapter 2. The turning point came on the eve of the scheduled demolition. The city above was restless. Despite the council's propaganda, the blue breach Silas had created hadn't entirely closed. A faint, ethereal violet hue still tinged the northern horizon, a stubborn scar on the gray face of the twilight. The rumors could not be rationed. Whispers traveled along the assembly lines, through the soup kitchens, and into the dark tenements. The boy found the fire. The boy opened the world. In the deepest well of the pits, Silas lay in the dark, his body broken but his mind remarkably clear. The fever had burned away his fear. He knew he was going to die here, but he felt an odd, profound peace. He had delivered the message. The spark had been struck, it was up to the world to decide if it wanted to burn or freeze. A soft, scraping sound echoed from the ceiling of his cell. Silas didn't move, thinking it was the rats or another hallucination brought on by the infection in his hand. But then, a heavy thud shook the floor. A lantern was unhooded, its light revealing not a guard, but a young woman in the grease-stained overalls of a foundry worker. Her face was smudged with soot, and her eyes were wide with a fierce, desperate intelligence. "Silas," she whispered, rushing to his side. She carried a heavy set of bolt cutters and a leather pouch that smelled of sulfur. "Who?" Silas coughed, his chest burning. "My name is Maeve," she said, quickly positioning the jaws of the cutters against his wrist chains. "My brother was on the guard detail that dragged you down here. He told me what Vane did to you. He told me you didn't cry out for mercy, you just kept telling them about the sun." With a loud clack, the first chain snapped. Silas collapsed forward, his weight catching Maeve by surprise. She caught him, her hands steady despite the trembling of her breath. "The whole lower district is waking up, Silas," she said, attacking the second chain. "We've been living on ash and lies for 3 generations. We thought the sky was just a roof made of stone and smoke. But if there's blue out there, if there's a world where things grow without the council's permission, we want it." "The demolition crew," Silas managed to say, his fingers gripping her shoulder with surprising strength. "The Iron Pass, they're going to destroy the beacon." "Not if we destroy the gates first," Maeve replied, snapping the final bond. She pulled a flask of warm broth from her coat and held it to his lips. "We don't need you to fight, Silas. You can barely stand. We just need you to show them that you're still alive. The council told the city you died of the blight 2 days ago. They're trying to bury your memory before they bury the mountain." Silas drank, the warm fluid feeling like liquid lightning in his veins. He looked at his ruined left hand, then at the soot-stained face of the girl before him. He wasn't a scholar anymore, and he wasn't a victim. He was the evidence. "Help me up," Silas said. Chapter 3. The escape from the lower pits was not a stealthy extraction, it was a running battle that spilled into the industrial heart of Oakhaven. Maeve's network was vast. For every guard that raised a rifle, 3 foundry workers stepped out from the shadows with iron pipes, wrenches, and heavy smithing hammers. The anger of 50 years of starvation was boiling over, and Silas was the catalyst. As they emerged into the lower plazas, the scene was chaotic. Thousands of citizens had gathered in the streets, holding torches made of rags and machine oil. They were facing a wall of council enforcers clad in black iron armor, their steam-powered rifles leveled at the crowd. "People of Oakhaven," Commander Jarek's voice boomed over a brass megaphone from the steps of the High Court. "Return to your sectors. The criminal Silas has been executed for treason and sabotage against the city's life support systems. Any further assembly will result in an immediate termination of grain rations." The crowd wavered. The threat of starvation was an old, effective leash. The torches dipped, and the silence that followed was heavy with the weight of impending defeat. Then Maeve stepped onto the bed of a heavy cargo transport, pulling Silas up beside her. The lantern light caught his face. He was a horrific sight. His coat was torn away, revealing the jagged red burns across his ribs and the salt-bitten scars on his back. His left arm hung uselessly in a rough sling, and his face was pale as death. But he stood upright. He refused to lean on Maeve. A gasp rippled through the front lines of the crowd. Then a voice shouted, "He's alive. The Sun-bringer is alive. Look at me," Silas shouted, his voice carrying through the square, amplified by the high stone walls of the plazas. It wasn't the voice of an academic anymore, it was a voice forged in the fire of the mountain and the iron of the pits. "Look at what they did to keep you in the dark. They didn't torture me because I lied. They tortured me because I told the truth. The sky is real. The sun is alive. They want to blow up the Iron Pass because once you see the light, you will never look at their chains the same way again." The crowd erupted. It wasn't a riot, it was an avalanche. The wall of enforcers was swamped by a sea of humanity within seconds. Rifles were torn from hands, iron shields were shattered by the sheer weight of numbers. Commander Jarek tried to draw his sword, but he was swept off the steps by a dozen workers, his megaphone trampling into the dirt. Silas didn't stop to watch the victory in the square. "The pass," he told Maeve. "We have to get to the pass before the charges are detonated." Using a captured steam wagon, Silas, Maeve, and a vanguard of armed citizens roared through the northern gates of the city, tearing down the road that led to the jagged teeth of the Whispering Peaks. The sky above them was changing again, the gray clouds were churning, darkening into a furious, unnatural black as the council's engineers at the pass began to trigger the early black powder charges, trying to force a premature collapse of the canyon walls. Chapter 4. The Iron Pass was a nightmare of smoke and falling stone when the wagon arrived. The council's elite guard had fortified the narrow entrance, using heavy iron barricades to hold off the mountain trail. At the top of the ridge, Sharon stood beside the head engineer, his hands shaking as he held the long wire that led to the primary demolition charges packed into the canyon's arches. "Hurry!" Sharon screamed over the roar of the wind. "Trigger the secondary line. If that beacon stays active for another hour, the city is gone." "We can't," the engineer shouted back, wiping sweat and ash from his eyes. "The pressure valves are jamming. The mountain is shifting from the heat of the core." A shot echoed through the gorge. The engineer dropped, a bullet from Maeve's rifle catching him in the shoulder. The steam wagon crashed through the first perimeter line, its iron chassis grinding against the rocks. Silas scrambled out of the passenger side, tumbling into the freezing snow. The cold hit him like an old friend, clearing the fog from his mind. He couldn't use his left hand, but he dragged himself up the steep, icy path toward the detonator platform, his boots slipping on the crystalline frost. Commander Jarek, who had escaped the city on horseback, intercepted him at the top of the ridge. His face was bloody, his armor dented, and his eyes burned with a murderous, fanatical light. He drew a heavy, serrated combat knife. "You've destroyed the city, boy," Jarek hissed, lunging forward. "You've killed us all." Silas didn't have a weapon. As Jarek lunged, Silas sidestepped, the knife tearing through his coat and grazing his shoulder. The pain was nothing compared to what he had already endured. Using Jarek's own momentum against him, Silas threw his weight into the commander's chest, slamming him against the stone railing of the platform. Jarek roared, raising the knife for a killing blow, but Maeve was there. She tackled Jarek from behind, sending the knife spinning into the abyss below. The two rolled into the snow, fighting for control of a dropped rifle. Silas turned his eyes to the detonator. Sharon stood over the plunger, his hand white on the handle. "Don't do it, Sharon," Silas said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, almost gentle, despite the chaos around them. "I have to, Silas," Sharon cried, tears streaming down his face, freezing into icy tracks. "If the old world dies, everything I spent my life studying dies with it. We aren't ready for what's out there. The dark is safe. We know how to survive the dark." "Look up, Sharon," Silas said, pointing with his one good hand toward the northern horizon. Beyond the smoke of the black powder, the white obelisk on the high plateau was pulsing. The silver beam it had projected into the sky hadn't died, it had grown wider, turning the surrounding clouds into a swirling vortex of iridescent, golden light. The frost on the canyon walls was melting, turning into rushing streams of crystal-clear water that cascaded down the black rocks like silver ribbons. The blight was not just receding, it was being erased. The air smelled of wet earth and alpine pine, the smell of life returning to a dead world. "The history books didn't write about the dark to make us love it," Silas said, taking another step closer. "They wrote about it so we would remember how to find the exit. You taught me how to read the maps, Sharon. Now let me show you where they lead." Sharon looked at the plunger, then at the golden vortex above, and finally at the broken, beautiful boy before him, a boy who had survived everything the dark could throw at him and had come out glowing. With a long, shuddering sob, Sharon let go of the handle. He fell to his knees in the slush, covering his face with his hands. "I was so afraid," he whispered. "I was so tired of being cold." Chapter 5. 3 years later, the city of Oakhaven was no longer a tomb. The high stone walls of the lower districts had been torn down, their blocks used to build terraces along the fertile green slopes of the valley. The sour ash had been washed away by 3 seasons of warm rain, replaced by a rich, black loam that sprouted fields of golden wheat and vibrant green clover. The sky above was an unblemished, infinite blue. At the center of the valley, where the Iron Pass had once been, a new settlement had grown. It was a place of open air, glass windows, and gardens that climbed the sides of the stone cliffs. At the highest point of the settlement stood a simple, open-air pavilion overlooking the entire valley. Silas stood at the railing, looking out over the fields. He wore a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up. His left hand was still scarred, the fingers slightly crooked, and his back bore the permanent white tracks of his trial in the pits. But he moved with an easy, fluid grace. He wasn't a prisoner of history anymore, he was the author of the future. Maeve walked up beside him, carrying a basket of fresh fruit from the lower orchards, the first true harvest of the new era. She picked out a bright red apple and handed it to him. "The council's old archives have been fully moved to the new library," she said, leaning against the rail. "The scholars are having a hard time rewriting the books. They don't have enough words for all the different colors the flowers are turning." Silas smiled, taking a bite of the fruit. The sweetness was real, sharp, and alive. "Let them make up new words," he said, turning his face up to catch the full, unhindered warmth of the afternoon sun. "We have plenty of time to learn them." Behind them, a group of children ran through the terraced gardens, their laughter echoing through the clear air, a sound that had never been heard in the old dark. They didn't know what the fade was, and they didn't know the smell of sour ash. To them, the sky had always been blue, and the world had always been wide. Silas watched them go, his heart full. The journey had been long, the road had been paved with iron and blood, but the lost hope had been found, and it was never going to go out again.